In the quiet corners of the galaxy, beyond the bustling trade routes and sparkling space stations, there was a world that had once been full of life and culture. This planet, named Nelaris, was the home of a race of beings known as the Alviri. The Alviri were a peaceful and artistic species, known for their stunning architecture, beautiful art, and unique ways of thinking. Their society had flourished for centuries, with their cities shining under the light of their twin suns. But all of that changed when a massive natural disaster struck. It wasn't just a small storm or earthquake. It was a catastrophe that ripped apart their world. Entire cities were destroyed, forests turned to ash, and the oceans boiled with the heat of a planet in pain. What followed was worse than the disaster itself. With their home in ruins and their numbers dwindling, the Alviri reached out to other civilizations in the galaxy for help. But to their shock, they were ignored. The larger galactic powers, the ones who controlled vast territories and who had the resources to help, simply turned away. Some said that the Alviri were too weak to be worth saving. Others claimed that Nelaris no longer held any value. After all, the Alviri had no powerful weapons, no rare resources to offer, and no influence among the stars. Slowly, the rest of the galaxy moved on, leaving the Alviri to struggle alone. Years passed, and the Alviri became more and more isolated. Many of their cities lay in ruins, abandoned by both their creators and the rest of the galaxy. Those who remained were scattered across the broken landscape, surviving however they could. Some took shelter in the ruins of their former homes, while others fled to distant planets, trying to build a new life with what little they had left. But even these distant colonies were not safe. Pirates and scavengers soon found that the Alviri were an easy target. Without the strength to defend themselves, the Alviri became the perfect prey. Their old technology, once a symbol of their thriving civilization, was now worth more to others than to them. One by one, their colonies were raided, their artifacts stolen, and their people taken away. Those few who survived were left to wander the galaxy, nothing more than a forgotten memory. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy continued as usual. The large galactic empires expanded, traded, and fought over resources. The Alviri, though still alive, were lost in the shadows, their voices unheard. No one seemed to care. That was, until a small human exploratory fleet stumbled upon Nelaris. Captain Elias Vance led the fleet of humans that had been sent on a peaceful mission to chart the outer regions of the galaxy. They weren't searching for trouble, nor were they expecting to find anything extraordinary. They had no reason to suspect that the planet Nelaris, once thriving with life, had become a place of sorrow and loss. But as they approached the planet, their scanners detected signs of life. Faint signals from survivors hidden deep within the wreckage. When Vance's fleet landed, they didn't expect to find a civilization in such distress. They had only heard rumors about the Alviri, a race of artists and philosophers who had once been famous across the galaxy. But as they saw the ruined cities and the scattered, desperate groups of survivors, they realized the truth. The Alviri were the forgotten ones, left behind by every civilization they had once known. The humans were shocked. How could such a beautiful, intelligent species be abandoned? How could the galaxy, full of advanced civilizations, ignore them? Vance, a man who had always believed in the value of helping others, knew that this couldn't be allowed to continue. He gathered his crew and sent a message to the Alviri, offering help. At first, the Alviri didn't believe it. They had been lied to, ignored, and mistreated for so long that they couldn't imagine that someone would come to their aid without expecting something in return. But when they saw the human ships and the genuine kindness in their eyes, something changed. For the first time in generations, the Alviri allowed themselves to hope. They agreed to meet. Captain Vance stood at the front of the meeting, ready to face the leaders of the Alviri. He promised them something that no other species had given them before: protection. He offered them not only resources and rebuilding assistance, but also a chance to be heard, a chance to rebuild their culture, and most importantly, a promise that they would not be forgotten again. As the humans and Alviri began their first conversation, the air was thick with the weight of history. The Alviri were reluctant to believe in such promises, but for the first time, they had something that none of the other galactic civilizations had given them: hope. Captain Vance knew the path ahead would not be easy. The rest of the galaxy wouldn't understand. They would question humanity's choice to intervene. But in his heart, he believed that the Alviri were worth saving, and that humanity would be the ones to do it. And so, in the forgotten corner of the galaxy, where no one had cared for so long, the story of the Alviri was about to change. It wasn't over. Not yet. When the humans first made contact with the Alviri, it was like the dawn of a new day for a people who had spent centuries in the dark. Captain Elias Vance and his crew had come with a single purpose: to offer help to the forgotten alien race. The Alviri, who had seen so many false promises in the past, were hesitant. Their world had been left in ruins, their people scattered, and they had learned the hard way that no one cared about their survival. But there was something different about the humans. Their sincerity was undeniable. As Captain Vance spoke to the Alviri leaders, he didn't offer them weapons or riches. He offered them hope. He promised that humanity wouldn't abandon them as others had. The Alviri, cautious but desperate, agreed to a meeting, unsure of what to believe. The first gathering took place in the remains of one of their once great cities. The streets were quiet, and the buildings, once elegant and full of life, were now nothing more than silent witnesses to the devastation. Captain Vance arrived with his crew, a small but well-equipped group of humans, and they brought with them supplies: food, water, and medical kits. For the first time in years, the Alviri saw something that wasn't a reminder of their fall. They saw help. The leader of the Alviri, a wise and aged being named Vera, stood before Captain Vance. She was thin, her skin marked by the harsh conditions her people had endured, yet her eyes still held the same spark of curiosity and intelligence that had once defined her race. She looked at the humans carefully, unsure whether to trust them. "Why have you come?" Vera's voice was soft, but carried a weight of experience. She had lived through the pain of watching her people's dreams fall apart. "We've come to help," Captain Vance said firmly. His words weren't just an offer, they were a promise. He looked at Vera and the others who had gathered around, sensing their distrust, but also their need. "The galaxy may have forgotten you, but we haven't. We've brought supplies, and we'll do everything we can to help you rebuild." The Alviri listened in silence, the weight of Vance's words hanging in the air. They had heard promises before, most of them broken. Many of their people had believed that help would come only to be disappointed. Some had lost their lives to the harsh conditions of their shattered world, others to the pirates who raided their scattered colonies. How could they believe again? But Vera, despite her doubts, saw something in the humans that set them apart from the countless other species that had passed by. There was no greed in their eyes, no hidden motives. Captain Vance wasn't looking for a trade or power. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He just wanted to help. Slowly, the Alviri began to speak. They shared their struggles with the humans, describing the hardships they had faced since the disaster. Their numbers were dwindling, their homes destroyed, and their technology was either lost or broken. The pirates had stripped their colonies bare, leaving only the most desperate survivors behind. They had no resources to defend themselves, no way to fight back. They had hoped for help, but had learned to expect nothing. Captain Vance listened carefully, taking in every word. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The galaxy was vast, and not everyone would be as understanding as the humans. In fact, some would likely see their intervention as a waste of time or a challenge to the established powers. But Vance wasn't afraid of the challenges ahead. He believed in humanity's ability to stand up for the weak, to protect those who had no one else to turn to. "What can we do for you?" Vera asked, her voice hesitant but hopeful. Captain Vance smiled warmly. "We can start by rebuilding," he said. "We'll send engineers, medical teams, and supplies. We'll help you restore your cities, your farms, and your way of life. But more than that, we'll be here to defend you from the pirates and anyone else who would harm you." For the first time in years, Vera felt a flicker of hope. She looked around at her people, some weary, some broken, but all still here, still fighting to survive. They had survived the disaster, and they had survived the neglect of the galaxy. But now, there was something different. The humans had come, and they weren't leaving. "What do you ask in return?" Vera's voice was filled with curiosity. She had to know if there was a catch. Captain Vance shook his head. "Nothing. We've come because it's the right thing to do. We don't ask for anything, except that you allow us to help." The room was quiet as the Alviri absorbed his words. Slowly, they began to nod, one by one. Vera, though cautious, could see that the humans meant what they said. And for the first time in decades, the Alviri began to believe that their future might not be as bleak as they had thought. As the meeting ended, Captain Vance and his crew began unloading the supplies, setting up the first of many projects that would help the Alviri rebuild. Vera watched, her heart full of gratitude. She knew there was still much to do, and the road ahead would be difficult. But one thing had changed for sure. They were no longer alone. For the first time in a long time, the Alviri had a real chance at survival. And it was all because of humanity's decision to protect them when no one else would. After Captain Vance and his crew began their work to help the Alviri, the reality of their task started to set in. The first few days were full of hope and optimism, but soon the challenges became apparent. It wasn't just the damage to the Alviri cities or the scarcity of resources. It was the larger problem that Vance and the humans hadn't anticipated: the galactic powers. Humanity had always been considered a newcomer in the galaxy. While Earth had made impressive strides in space exploration and technology, they were still seen as a relatively small player compared to the older, more established civilizations. The Galactic Council, the governing body of the galaxy, was composed of powerful species who had long since dominated the stars. These species had their own interests, their own politics, and above all, their own disdain for the newcomers from Earth. Captain Vance knew that the Council would not be pleased with humanity's intervention in the affairs of the Alviri. The Alviri were not an important species in the grand scheme of galactic politics. They had no valuable resources, no vast military, and no strategic position in the galaxy. To most of the galactic leaders, the Alviri were a forgotten race, one that had little to offer. They would be seen as a burden, something that the galaxy didn't need to spend resources on. But Vance believed differently. He knew that every life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, was worth protecting. He believed that humanity had something to offer, something that the galaxy needed: compassion. The humans weren't just interested in expansion or control. They weren't trying to gain anything from the Alviri. They were here to help, simply because it was the right thing to do. Despite their good intentions, humanity was about to face a wall of resistance. The first sign of trouble came when Vance submitted a formal request to the Galactic Council for aid in restoring the Alviri. He asked for support, resources, medical supplies, and a commitment to the Alviri's future. It seemed like a reasonable request. After all, if the galaxy had ignored the Alviri for centuries, surely the Council would see the humans' intervention as a chance to right a wrong. But when Vance's proposal was brought before the Council, the response was cold and dismissive. The Council members, alien species with vast territories and powerful fleets, were uninterested. They saw no reason to prioritize the Alviri. "There are far more important issues to consider," said Emperor Thalkar, leader of the Exceltor Dominion, one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. His words echoed throughout the council chamber. "This project of yours is a waste of resources. The Alviri have already fallen. They are no longer relevant." Other council members nodded in agreement. The Antharians, a race of bird-like beings, spoke next. Humanity should focus on their own growth, not waste energy on the weak. They said, their voices sharp and unyielding. Vance felt a pang of frustration, but he stood firm. He knew that the council's view was narrow, shaped by greed and apathy. The Elviri are not weak, Vance argued. They are a proud species, and they deserve a chance to rebuild. Humanity is offering that chance. If the galaxy can't see that, then we will do it alone. But the council wasn't ready to back down. They simply saw the Elviri as no longer worth saving, a group of beings who had faded into obscurity. The council members turned their backs on the request, and the meeting ended with nothing more than a cold silence. Back on the human fleet, the mood was grim. Captain Vance knew that the council would not lift a finger to help the Elviri. It was up to humanity to keep their promise. Yet he couldn't help but feel anger at the indifference of the galaxy's powers. The Elviri's fate wasn't something that could be easily dismissed. Despite the council's rejection, Vance and his crew pressed forward. They sent more ships, more resources, and more volunteers to the Elviri. The humans were determined to make a difference, and they weren't going to let the council's cold shoulder stop them. However, they soon discovered that the council's dismissal wasn't the only obstacle they faced. The XL Tor Dominion, angered by the humans' interference, began to make threats. They'd warned humanity to stay out of the Elviri's affairs, implying that if the humans didn't back off, they might face consequences. While the Dominion didn't want to fight the humans directly, their influence in the galaxy was strong enough to make things difficult for Earth's mission. But Captain Vance didn't back down. He knew that the Elviri needed protection, and humanity would not allow them to fall into further despair. The decision was made. Humanity would stand firm in its commitment to the Elviri, no matter the cost. And so, despite the galaxy's indifference, humanity continued its work. The Elviri, though wary at first, began to trust their human allies more and more. Together, they began to rebuild, one step at a time. Captain Vance could see it now, more clearly than ever. The Elviri's future wasn't about the rest of the galaxy. It was about the humans who had decided to care when no one else would. And in that, Vance found a deeper meaning. A reminder that no matter how small a race may seem in the eyes of others, their value is never determined by the galaxy's indifference. It was the simple act of compassion, the refusal to ignore the forgotten, that could change the course of history. As the days turned into weeks and then into months, the bond between the humans and the Elviri grew stronger. Captain Vance and his crew worked tirelessly alongside the Elviri, helping them rebuild their cities, replant their forests, and restore their way of life. It wasn't an easy task. The damage to the planet was vast, and many of the old technologies were beyond repair. But the humans brought something the Elviri hadn't seen in a long time: dedication. The human engineers and scientists set up camps across the shattered cities, working day and night to stabilize the environment and repair the critical systems that had once powered the Elviri's advanced cities. While the Elviri struggled with the physical labor of rebuilding, they offered their knowledge and skills in art, philosophy, and architecture. The humans marveled at the beauty of the Elviri's culture, and in turn, the Elviri saw a glimpse of hope through the human desire to help. What started as a simple act of kindness blossomed into a full-fledged alliance. The humans didn't just bring supplies, they brought new ideas, a fresh perspective on the future. They helped the Elviri learn how to grow crops in the harsh, barren soil, introducing agricultural techniques that had allowed Earth to thrive. The Elviri taught the humans about their unique artistic techniques, and soon, the two species were exchanging more than just resources. They were exchanging culture, creating a bond that was stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. But despite the growing alliance, the shadows of the galaxy's indifference still loomed large. The XL Tor Dominion, angry at humanity's interference, continued to issue threats. They made it clear that they didn't want humanity helping the Elviri, and they started pressuring other galactic factions to take a stand. The Galactic Council, still unmoved by the humans' actions, began to whisper among themselves about the growing power of the human alliance. In the midst of these external pressures, the Alviri faced their own internal struggles. They were a peaceful people, once united by art and philosophy, but the devastation they had faced had left scars. Some Alviri feared that they would never be able to return to their old ways, and the rise of their new alliance with the humans brought mixed feelings. There were those who felt grateful, seeing the humans as saviors, and those who felt ashamed, believing that they had become too reliant on outside help. Vera, the leader of the Alviri, spent countless hours in quiet reflection, thinking about the future of her people. She had seen the potential for something great to come from this alliance, but she also worried about the price. Would her people ever be able to stand on their own again, or had they become too dependent on the humans? Captain Vance, too, had his moments of doubt. He had always believed that helping others was the right thing to do. But now, as the pressures of the galaxy mounted, he began to wonder if he was asking too much of his people. The humans had already given so much. Could they continue to bear the weight of this responsibility? And what would happen when the rest of the galaxy took notice of their growing influence? Despite these doubts, both Vera and Vance knew that there was no turning back. The alliance between humans and Alviri had become something more than just a rescue mission. It had become a symbol of hope in a galaxy that had long been indifferent to the plight of those in need. One day, as Vance was overseeing the construction of a new power grid in one of the largest Alviri cities, he received an unexpected message. It was from High Chancellor Lauren, the leader of the Galactic Council. The message was short, but its implications were enormous. "We've been watching your efforts, Captain Vance. While we may not agree with your methods, it's clear that your intervention has changed the course of the Alviri's future. We're prepared to offer our official support, but know this, our involvement comes with conditions. The Alviri must pledge allegiance to the Galactic Council. They must become part of the greater galaxy, contributing to the Council's interests." Vance felt a wave of both relief and concern. The offer of official support from the Galactic Council could bring valuable resources, but at what cost? Would the Alviri have to give up their independence? Would they be forced to follow the Council's will, even if it meant sacrificing their way of life? Vera, too, was troubled by the message. She had worked so hard to rebuild the Alviri's culture, and now the Council was asking them to pledge their loyalty in exchange for help. It was a tempting offer, one that could ensure their survival. But at what price? The Alviri had always been a people of freedom, and the idea of becoming part of a larger, more powerful body like the Galactic Council was unsettling. The choice was not an easy one. Vance and Vera knew that they had to make a decision, one that would shape the future of their alliance and the fate of the Alviri. Should they accept the Council's offer and risk losing their independence, or should they continue on their own, relying solely on the humans who had already given so much? As they stood on the edge of this critical decision, both knew that this was no longer just about survival. This was about preserving the dignity of a people who had been forgotten for far too long. And it was about showing the galaxy that there was more to life than power and politics. It was about choosing what was right, no matter the cost. The decision that lay before Captain Vance and Vera weighed heavily on both of them. The message from the Galactic Council had been clear, but it also carried with it a deep uncertainty. The offer of official support was tempting, especially with the galaxy's resources at their disposal. It could mean advanced technology, medical aid, and military protection. It could provide a future of stability for the Alviri, a future they had almost given up on. But the cost was something neither Vance nor Vera was willing to ignore. If they accepted the Council's conditions, the Alviri would no longer be free. They would become just another cog in the vast machinery of galactic politics. Their culture, their history, would be overshadowed by the Council's interests, and their independence would be forever lost. For the Alviri, a people who had once been the masters of their own destiny, the thought of becoming subservient to a greater galactic power was almost unbearable. Vera spent many sleepless nights walking through the ruins of her people's old cities, thinking deeply about their future. The quiet hum of the rebuilding efforts, humans and Alviri working side by side, was a comforting reminder of how far they had come. But would it be enough? Could they continue to rebuild on their own, or would they be forced to turn to the Galactic Council for help? One evening, as Vera stood on the balcony of what was once the great council hall of the Alviri, Captain Vance joined her. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the city, and the air was warm with the promise of a peaceful evening. "I've been thinking," Vera began softly, not looking at Vance, but instead gazing out at the city. "The Council's offer is more than just an offer of help. It's a trap. They want us to give up our freedom in exchange for resources. The Alviri have always prided ourselves on our independence. We cannot allow ourselves to be absorbed into the Council's politics." Captain Vance called for an emergency meeting with his senior officers. As they gathered around the holographic table in the command center of the human flagship, Vance spoke with resolve. "The Dominion is coming. We've prepared for this, but we can't fight them alone. We need to find allies. If we can convince other factions to join us, we may stand a chance." One of his officers, Lieutenant Anderson, a sharp strategist, spoke up. "Sir, there are smaller factions in the galaxy, neutral parties who may be sympathetic to our cause. If we can get word to them before the Dominion does, we might gain support. It's a risk, but we don't have many options." Vance nodded, his mind racing. "It's our best shot. I want every possible communication channel open. We'll reach out to anyone who might be willing to stand against the Dominion." Meanwhile, on the surface of the Alviri homeworld, Vera and the other leaders of the Alviri were preparing for the worst. The news of the Exceltor's fleet had reached them, and while they had expected some sort of retaliation, the reality of the situation was far more dire than they had imagined. The Alviri had no military to speak of. Their people were peaceful, focused on art, science, and philosophy. They had never needed to fight for their survival, until now. Vera stood in the heart of one of the newly rebuilt cities, staring up at the sky. The air was thick with tension, and she could feel the weight of her people's fear. "Captain Vance has kept his word," she thought. "But what if it's not enough? What if the galaxy's power is too great for us to stand against?" In that moment, a familiar voice broke her thoughts. It was Krolak, an elder of the Alviri, and one of the few who had lived through the fall of their once great civilization. He had seen the rise and fall of their empire, and now he was one of the few who could guide them through their darkest hour. "We will not go quietly, Vera," Krolak said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "The Exceltor Dominion believes we are weak, that we will bow to their will. But they forget that the Alviri are a people of great strength. We have endured the worst, and we will endure again. This is our fight, and we will not let the humans face it alone." Vera looked at him, a new resolve building in her heart. "You're right. We can't just sit and wait for our fate to be decided by others. We must act. Together, we have a chance." The message was clear. The Alviri would not be passive in this battle. Vera called together the remaining leaders of her people, and they began to formulate a plan. Even though their forces were few, they had the one thing the Exceltor did not: the will to fight for what they believed in. As Vance worked to rally allies, Vera began organizing the Alviri to defend their home. They could not stand against the Dominion's fleet in open combat, but they could use their knowledge of the terrain and their resourcefulness to create obstacles, hide their most important cities, and prepare for guerrilla tactics. Every Alviri, from the young to the old, was trained to help in any way they could. For the humans, the fight for the Alviri was more than just a battle for survival. It had become a symbol of defiance against the powerful forces that ruled the galaxy without compassion. It was a fight for the right to protect those who had been forgotten, to show the galaxy that there was more to life than politics and power. Vance's eyes never left the stars as he watched the fleet prepare. They were outnumbered, but they were not without hope. They had humanity's heart on their side. They had the Alviri's strength to fight for. And most importantly, they had something the Exceltor Dominion had long forgotten: the power of a united cause. The storm was coming. It would not be easy, and there would be sacrifices along the way. But Captain Vance and Vera knew that they had made the right choice. They would stand together, no matter the odds. The galaxy might see them as insignificant, but they knew that even the smallest flame could light up the darkest night. And that flame was burning brighter than ever. The battle was inevitable. The Exceltor Dominion's fleet arrived in the Alviri system with terrifying speed, their ships gliding through the void like dark shadows. The humans and Alviri had spent every moment in preparation, making the most of their time to build defenses, train for combat, and gather any allies willing to stand with them. But the odds were still stacked against them. The Dominion's fleet outnumbered them by more than 3-1. As the first wave of Dominion ships appeared on the horizon, Captain Vance stood at the command center, his gaze fixed on the massive holographic display of the battlefield. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was calm. He had seen many battles in his time, but nothing like this. The stakes were higher than ever before. If they lost, the Alviri would be absorbed into the Dominion, and humanity's efforts to protect them would be in vain. The entire galaxy would learn that standing up for the weak came with heavy costs. "All ships, prepare for combat," Vance ordered, his voice steady. "We fight for the Alviri, for their freedom, and for every people the galaxy has forgotten. This is our stand." The humans' fleet was small but fierce, their ships equipped with the best technology they had. But it wasn't just their weapons that made them dangerous. It was their determination. They fought not for power or glory, but for the freedom of those who could not fight for themselves. It was this unwavering will that made them more dangerous than any weapon in the Dominion's arsenal. On the surface of the Alviri homeworld, Vera stood beside Krolak, watching the sky as it darkened with the presence of the Exceltor fleet. The air was thick with tension, but there was a calm resolve in her eyes. The Alviri were ready. They had prepared every possible defense they could, hiding their most important cities in the dense forests and mountainous regions of their world. They had set traps and ambush points, and they had created networks of underground bunkers where they could hide if the worst came to pass. "Today, we show the galaxy who we are," Vera said, her voice low but resolute. "We will not be forgotten. We will fight with everything we have for the future of our people and the future of the Alviri." Krolak nodded. "The Exceltor Dominion may have the power of their fleet, but they do not have the spirit we have. We fight not for survival alone, but for our dignity, for the honor of our culture, and for the promise that no one will be left behind again." As the battle began, the humans and Alviri launched their attack together. The first wave of Dominion ships fired on the Alviri defense systems, but the humans' quick tactics kept them guessing. Their smaller fleet darted around the larger Dominion ships, using the Alviri's knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They used guerrilla tactics, striking quickly and retreating before the enemy could respond. The Exceltor were used to dominating their opponents, not being forced into a defensive position. Their ships, massive and imposing, were designed for intimidation, not speed. And while the Dominion fleet was strong, they weren't prepared for the speed and unpredictability of the human and Alviri forces. As the battle raged in the stars, Vera and her people worked on the ground. They launched their own surprise attacks on Dominion supply lines, using the environment to their advantage. The Dominion had underestimated the Alviri's ability to adapt. The very same peaceful people who had once been known for their art and culture were now showing a side of themselves that had never been seen before, a side that could fight with the strength of their ancestors. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Vance received a transmission. It was from one of the smaller galactic factions they had reached out to, the Terran Coalition. They had agreed to join the fight, sending a fleet of their own to assist the humans and Alviri. The Terran Coalition wasn't the strongest force in the galaxy, but their presence was a symbol that the fight for freedom and dignity was not just humanity's cause, but the cause of every race that had been ignored by the larger empires. Vance's heart lifted at the news. With the Terran ships joining the fight, the balance of power began to shift. The Dominion was no longer facing a single, isolated force. They were facing a coalition of will, a united front that refused to be broken. The battle continued for hours. The sky lit up with flashes of bright light as ships clashed in space, and the ground trembled with explosions. But despite the odds, humanity and the Alviri were holding their ground. With each passing moment, the Dominion fleet began to retreat. The humans and their new allies fought with a passion that the Dominion couldn't match. Finally, after hours of fierce combat, the Centaur fleet began to pull back. Their flagship, the largest of all, signaled for retreat. The humans and their allies had won. The battle was over. Captain Vance stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the retreating Dominion fleet as it disappeared into the stars. He could hardly believe it. The impossible had happened. Against all odds, they had held their ground. The Alviri were safe. Their independence had been secured. On the surface of the Alviri homeworld, Vera stood with her people, gazing up at the stars. The battle had been long and hard, but they had won. The Alviri were free. They were no longer forgotten. The galaxy had witnessed the strength of their will and the power of unity. As the sun rose over the peaceful world, Vera smiled. "We are no longer a forgotten people," she whispered, "and the galaxy will never forget us again." With the battle won, the future of the Alviri and humanity was brighter than ever. Together, they had proven that the power of the heart and the strength of unity could overcome any challenge, even the mightiest empire in the galaxy. And with this victory, the promise of a better tomorrow was now within their reach.